Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley.
And I'm her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi and I want to welcome you to Open to Hope Conversations, the podcast.
We believe that the greatest gift you can give yourself after a loss is hope, using this moment to connect with others who have not only survived but thrived.
So let's get started. Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley. My co-host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, is on a trip today, so I'll be flying solo on the show today, but I've got a great guest on and I'm really going to enjoy it because we're going to be talking about conversations about death and grief, and she's a very creative person, and I think you're going to get a lot of creative ideas. So before I start the show, I would like to tell you all that our book, Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating, that I wrote with my fiance, Dr. Frank Powers. It's got tips and tools and guides on how you might want to go into senior dating if you've lost a partner and you're ready to move on to dating. So I'm excited about our guest today. Her name is Elizabeth Coplan, and Elizabeth Coplan is an amazing person. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Gloria. Speaking of an amazing person yourself.
And she's so great. She's joining us from Costa Rica, but I just can't even begin to tell you all her accomplishments. But, you know, she was in marketing and public relations early on. And then after tragedy struck her in 2013, she turned to writing to express her personal grief. And she's written many essays. And later, after experiencing 3 losses in less than a year, she turned to writing plays focused on global experience known as death. And in 2016, Elizabeth developed the groundbreaking play Grief Dialogues and built a nonprofit, Grief Dialogues, a theatrical movement, creating new conversations about death, dying, and grief. And I was able to go to New York City and see her fabulous play, Till Death. It was absolutely amazing to meet her wonderful, wonderful husband, Scott, who's done some things with her, right?
Yes, we do a lot together, actually. It's great.
So cool. He was telling me about it, and that I should take a dialogue writing class because I love, love, love plays. I think that they really bring you so close to realness and what's going on in the world. So talk
Yes.
about your losses a little bit and what got you started in this direction.
Sure. I did experience a number. I lost my father in 96, my mother in 2001, and those were, traumatic losses. My dad was much too young. Not that anybody is ever too old, quite frankly, but it was not expected, and he had just retired 6 months before, and so that was a hard loss. My mom was suffering from complications of Parkinson's, and in some ways, I really I had started to grieve her loss long before she actually died. But what really propelled me to start writing as a way to deal with grief and to open up conversations about death was there were 3 deaths in one year that really stimulated kind of the creative juices, if you will. For example, my cousin who died of ovarian cancer, she did not have children, and my sister and I were like, the 3 of us were sisters, like more than cousins, much more than cousins. We were more like sisters. And so when Myra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer the second time, my sister went down to California to be with her, and then I joined them, and we were there when she died, and we were there the last 10 days of her life. And that was very, very moving. I took time off work to be there, and when I went back from work, I found people assumed that because I was gone for 10 days, 2 weeks, that I had gone on vacation. When I explained what I was doing, people immediately changed the subject. You could tell they were really uncomfortable with the topic. So that happened. Then a friend of mine, that same year, a friend of mine's husband was killed in a freak accident. And she was told after 5 months of being a widow that it was time for her to move on, even though she'd been married for 35 years to this man that she loved dearly, and he loved her. And I seemed to be the only person that she could talk to about it because everybody else didn't want to talk about it. And then I had the actual not a loss per se, but a conversation with my 89-year-old father-in-law, who told me that if he died, it would be because the doctor had made some sort of medical mistake. And I realized he didn't want to talk about the inevitability of death. So these things kind of all happened in rapid succession. And I literally was trying to process it all more, not the loss so much as the fact that people just really didn't want to talk about it. It was almost as if you talk about loss or grief or death, it's as if it's contagious. So I started to write something about it, and I actually wrote a play, and I was in the middle of that and was talking to a friend of mine. I was kind of in a writer's block point, and she suggested that I do this little exercise that had the two characters, the two sisters, the day after their mother's death. This was all in this fictionalized play. And so I did that, and actually this little short play within a play actually really started to resonate with people in terms of I showed to other people to read, and they encouraged me to enter it into contests. So 10-minute plays were just beginning to become popular. So I submitted it. It's called Hospice: A Love Story.
What did you find in that play? What resonates with people after a death?
Well, that was the thing. It wasn't one thing. It was the fact that I shared this story, and people would come up to me afterwards and they would say to me things like, very simply, "Oh, I love that play. That was really funny," or "That was sad," whatever. You know, something like that happened to me when my mother died. And then they would launch into their own stories. And I realized it wasn't the fact that my play was so brilliantly written. It was because I was sharing a story, which meant other people could share their story. I had given them permission to share their stories. And that's when I got the idea of taking 6 or 7 short plays about dying, death, and grief, and creating what's now called Grief Dialogues, the play that we opened in 2016 at the Seattle Death Salon. And that play, like I said, 6 short stories, 6 short plays. And then we follow it with a discussion. Caitlin Dowdy, who wrote the book Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, it's about her first year working in a crematorium. She formed an organization called the Order of the Good Death. And they were doing these death salons.
Okay.
They did one in LA, one in San Francisco, one in Boston, one in Houston. And we brought it to Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm based. So I agreed to help put that whole thing together for her and for Order of the Good Death.
People are interested in the good death. But what I find, what there really is hard to sell is talking about how you cope with it after they're dead.
Yes.
That's where, because everybody's interested in talking about, oh, I'm gonna, this is how I want it to be, or that, but nobody wants to talk about, well, how did you cope after they died?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And they don't want to talk about it because you get shut down. If you want to talk about what happened, a lot of people just they want to like process what happened to their loved one. And if you're trying to process that and you get shut down because people don't want to hear it or they're afraid of it or whatever, you can't let that out, which is why I turned to writing. But I've also encouraged other people to tune to whatever art form might work for them. It can be drawing, it can be painting, just channeling that energy, that story that you have within you, those questions. I mean, even the best good death, I have found I just have lots of questions afterwards, and guilt. People have guilt no matter what. I just recently, one of my closest friends lost her sister-in-law, and her brother authorized the surgery, and she died due to complications of the surgery. And now the guilt he feels, although he made the right decision, he did everything right, but that guilt. And so this is all fresh to him, but I really would encourage him to find a way to channel that, whether it's talking to somebody or drawing or, playing music or writing music. The creative outlets really help to kind of flesh out, if you will, how your feelings, whether it was a good death or an accidental death, whether it was a surprise or something prolonged. It's a way to channel your feelings in a positive way, I guess.
One of the things I thought was really interesting in your play, the woman has not died yet, but she knows she's dying. But the way her partner, her husband, who is not the father of her children, the way as he is treated, particularly by the older daughter, and I think that's really important because after the death, also how is he going to be treated?
Right, right. And that's, yeah, there's so many things that, and like saying bring up until death, there's so many issues that happen when someone is dying, especially, from cancer or some chronic illness that or terminal illness. What the family unit, who the family unit is, and coming together. There's so many things that kind of jump out when someone is dying or has died, that if you haven't dealt with some of those things ahead of time. I know death doulas are a number of them, Susan O'Brien being one of them that I really love, talking about having those really hard conversations before a traumatic event like a loss. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily love your mother's new husband, but just having those conversations about how people want, how you want to die, how you want to be remembered when you die, who you want included in the room with you, those sorts of things, so that the family is on the same page and hopefully honoring the person who's dying, hopefully honoring their wishes.
I would think a really powerful play would be if you brought it through to what happens after they died.
Yeah.
Then how most of us haven't dealt with those tough conversations. People don't want to do that. They don't
Right.
want to face the death. They don't want to spend their time that way. It's depressing. It's not, we've got to be happy. So what happens after to that?
Right.
And,
Right. That would be an interesting play. I may steal that idea.
pulling it all the way through, because I've seen it. Particularly, I used to work in AIDS a lot back in the day, and I saw some tragic situations with partners after the partner died and they weren't able to access their apartment. They weren't able to say, it was a lot going on. So there's a lot that happens after the death that nobody wants to talk to and nobody wants to deal with. So I love your idea about doing it creatively, writing about the problems, writing about what's happening. We always like peer support, being able to get together with other people who are dealing with after the death.
Right. Right. Yes. And opening up, trying to be as open and honest as possible. And afterwards, and that's why I think art is so important, because it can help open that conversation. And I think that's what these plays do. In fact, I witnessed how watching a play, whether it's mine or another play, Wit is another one that comes to mind, where it kind of gives people an opportunity afterwards. You're talking about the play, but then you're really talking about what matters to you, right? So it's a natural way to open some conversations without without hitting the topic head on. You start talking about the play or the movie or the piece of art or music, and then it can become something else.
You kind of see yourself in it, and then you can be curious. I wonder what is going to happen to that
exactly
after she does that. I wonder what's going to happen to that family, and kind of creating your own story about that.
Right, exactly.
Everything's about story, isn't it?
It's all about story. It's all about story, and that's great, because think about how boring life would be if it wasn't about story, right? So
and the way you tell your story and the way you choose to tell your story.
My website, Grief Dialogues, we have people's stories. And what I really find there, that again is like the play, is that someone will write the story about the loss of their father. For example, we have a great one right now. It's actually very funny, an essay by Cynthia Kaplan. And then we get mail of people saying, oh my gosh, when my dad died, this essay reminded me when my dad died. I used to think there was nothing joyous that came out of that. And yet from reading her essay, I now remember some funny things that happened, and so that's the kind of stimulation that we like to do at Grief Dialogues, where we share these stories and then other people can add theirs. Really powerful that way.
Now give us all your websites and tell us what you're doing right now.
Great. So we have griefdialogues.com. And from griefdialogues.com, you can go on that website and you can go on art. And we have stories on there that people send to us that we curate. We don't, we try to make sure that it's something that a wide number of readers will be interested in. So we have that. We also have, we usually sponsor a film. 2 years ago, it was a film that I wrote called Honoring Choices. But we're now doing a film called My Guardian Angel, which is actually written by a 14-year-old girl out of Florida, Naya Chambliss, who she wrote the screenplay based on the loss of her childhood friend when she was 5. It's a beautiful, heartwarming story of, having this teen girl make sense of loss so early in life. So it's called My Guardian Angel. Right now, Naya and her father, Jerry, are fundraising to make that film happen, but it should be out before the end of the year. I'm working on another play called The Book Club, which is about 5 older women in a book club, and one of their members has just died. And it's set in a funeral home. It's more of a comedy than what I've written before. In 2016, when we did Brief Dialogues, the play, that was 6 short plays written by 6 different playwrights. We are now going to do a new version of that, and we're hoping to stage a reading in New York City in October. We've actually chosen 7 different plays for this one. And Danny Davis, the director, Danny Davis, has agreed to be our director for this show. So we'll be doing that in October, which is really exciting.
And we know it's all about story, and I love your story, and love to your husband. And thank you so much for being on the show and everything.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
And thanks everybody for joining us at the show today. And Heidi and I and all of the Open to Hope team always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.